You're in the middle of a hard moment with your child. Maybe it's a transition that's gone sideways. Maybe it's a meltdown over something that seems small. Whatever it is, you know what to do. You've read the books, you've watched the videos, you've learned to stay regulated, not to escalate, to ride it out. And then your partner walks in and in 30 seconds does the thing you know doesn't work. Or maybe it's the other version. Your partner thinks you're being too soft, that you're making excuses for your child, that you need to be firmer. Either way, you're not just managing your child's nervous system anymore. You're managing the gap between you and the person you're supposed to be doing this alongside every single day. Or maybe you're co-parents living in separate homes, but the same dynamic is a problem. You just don't see eye to eye on how to handle challenging moments. No one warns you how heavy that gets. I'm Andrea Pollack, parenting educator, coach, and parent of an autistic young adult. I've navigated this myself and worked with hundreds of families doing the same. Let me start with just naming what this is, because I don't think it's just parenting disagreement. When you and your co-parent are working from different frameworks, you're not just navigating different opinions about screen time or bedtime, you're trying to hold your child's nervous system together while also managing a gap in understanding with the person you're co-parenting with. And there's often a particular texture to it. Maybe you've shifted, you've done the work, you've changed the way you see your child's behavior from defiance to communication, from won't to can't yet. And you can see the difference that it makes. But you can't make that shift happen for someone else. And that gap between your approach and your partner's approach can feel enormous. I worked with a mom who once said that navigating her child's needs felt like being a constant translator to teachers, to extended families, to doctors. But the hardest translation, she said, was the one she had to do at home with the one person who was supposed to just know. What I hear most often in families navigating this isn't anger exactly. It's more, I would say, exhaustion. And underneath the exhaustion, something that feels a lot like grief and fear. Grief for the team you hoped you'd be, for the unified front everyone says you're supposed to present, and fear that the lack of unity is undermining your child's success. This may surprise you, but I want to push back on some conventional thinking that I think is making this harder than it needs to be. Every parenting resource, every therapist, every well-meaning friend will eventually say something along the lines of, you have to be consistent. You and your partner need to be on the same page. Your child needs to get the same message from both of you. And I understand that logic. The typical lens says inconsistency is confusing. If one parent allows something and one doesn't, then the child doesn't know what to expect. So the solution is to get aligned and stay aligned. That's the typical lens. But here's what that framing does to a parent who's already carrying this alone. It turns the gap between you and your partner into a crisis. It says that until you're both doing this the same way, something is broken. And I don't think that's true, or at least I don't think that's the whole truth. So I want to offer a different frame, and it's probably not what you've heard before. Your child is going to spend their entire lives navigating people who do things differently. Teachers who have different rules, extended family who respond in completely different ways, coaches, employers, friends, strangers, none of whom are going to coordinate with each other about how to be consistent. The world is not consistent, and one of the skills your child is building, slowly, with support, is how to navigate that. So the idea that your home needs to present only one way of doing things in order to be a good team is a lot of pressure, and I think that pressure's inflated. Here's what I think matters. Reserve your unity for the big decisions, the things that genuinely require both parents to be on the same page. The major accommodations, for example, or decisions about where your child goes to school. The things that shape your child's sense of safety and belonging at the deepest levels. For the everyday stuff, some natural variation between parents is not a failure. What it is a realistic preparation for the world your child lives in. Your child doesn't need perfect uniformity. They need enough safety, enough predictability, and at least one adult in their corner who really gets it. I remember speaking with a therapist in the early days of parenting where I was raising this exact concern, that my husband was not doing things the way I thought was best for my child. She responded, "What if his way is also good for your child?" I remember all the feelings rising up in that moment. She doesn't understand. Why is she sticking up for my husband? Wait, what if that's true? For example, I was the rule enforcer, the stickler, and I sometimes resented my husband's more, let's say, casual approach to the rules. But what if that was useful for my children to experience both perspectives? That thought had never entered my mind. Now, I do want to talk about what doesn't work because the instinct when you understand something your partner doesn't, when you can see clearly what your child needs and why, is to explain it, to make the case, to win the argument. And I understand that instinct completely, believe me. But nobody changes the way they parent because they lost a debate. That's not how it works. When people feel argued into something, they might comply, but they don't shift. And compliance without understanding doesn't hold up when things get hard. Right fighting, even when you're right, doesn't move the needle. What it usually does is make your partner more defensive and more entrenched. And then you're managing that too. So the question isn't, how do I convince them? The question is, what actually creates change? So far, we've been talking about a gap where you want to convince your partner to do things your way. But what happens when your partner doesn't just do things differently, but actively pushes back on the way you're doing it? Tells you you're being too soft, that you're making excuses for your child, that you need to be firmer. That's a different kind of pressure, and it deserves a specific response. Here's where I'd start, and it may feel counterintuitive, but listen first. Actually, listen. Not to perform openness, but because your partner may occasionally raise something worth considering. And the posture of someone who's genuinely listening looks very different from the posture of someone who is waiting to argue. Your partner will feel that difference. You can say, I hear you, let me think about that, and mean it. Or, this is the one I learned from a brilliant lawyer. It's a long story, too long to tell the whole thing here. But in a high-profile televised hearing, the judge made a comment sounding like he disagreed with this lawyer's position. So as not to flat out disagree with the judge, this lawyer said, ordinarily, Your Honor, I would agree with you. But in this case, and he made the exact opposite point. What I love about it is that moment of common ground at the start, before the disagreement even lands. You've already said, I see your point, and I can see cases in which that might be true. I'm not your opponent. That's what makes someone open to hearing you. And that's exactly what we're going for when we're talking to a partner who sees things differently. It doesn't mean abandoning what you know works. It means modeling the exact thing you're hoping your partner will eventually do. Consider another perspective without dismissing it. And then, when you have a moment without heat, you might explain your approach, not to defend it. There's a difference. Defending sounds like, you're wrong and here's why. Explaining sounds like, here's what I've noticed and why I think it matters. Something like, I know it doesn't always look like what you'd expect, but when I stayed calm through that hard moment last week, I noticed he came back to me faster. I think there's something to that. That might be the kind of explanation for why not to apply harsh discipline in the moment where your child is about to break down. You're not asking them to agree, you're offering evidence. You're letting the results make the case for itself. The goal isn't to win the conversation, the goal is to keep the door open for the next one. Here's what I've seen work in family after family. You model it without commentary, without acrimony, without a look that says, see what I'm doing? This is how it's done. You just do it. You respond to your child the way you know works. You stay regulated when they're not. You provide support through the hard moment, and you let your partner observe, not as a lesson, as a demonstration. If you do have an opportunity to discuss or reflect on the scenario, just explain your approach. Don't defend it. One parent I work with spent months feeling like she was doing this alone. She stopped trying to convince her husband. She stopped explaining. She just kept doing what she knew worked. One evening, her husband was standing in the doorway, watching as she sat with their son through a really hard moment. She didn't say anything to her husband afterward. No, see what I did there? A few weeks later, she saw him try it himself. He didn't have her language. He didn't frame it the way she would have, but he showed up with new energy. He sat with his son. She told me that was the moment she realized she hadn't been doing this alone as long as she'd thought. She'd been quietly showing him what was possible. The relationship that your partner wants to have with your child, the warmth, the trust, the moments of real connection, that's a powerful motivator. Often more powerful than any conversation you can have about neuroscience or regulation. When a parent sees that a different approach brings them closer to their child, not further away, that lands in a way that being told the right approach never does. So where you have room to influence, that's where it is, in the relationship, in the demonstration, in staying consistent in your own approach, not for the sake of appearances, but because it works, and you know it works. And where you don't have control is over the timeline, how long it takes, whether it happens at all in the way you're hoping. You can hold what you know is true about your child, you can keep building the relationship and the skills, and you can release the pressure to fix the gap with your partner. I want to come back to where we started. If you are the parent who has done the work, who has shifted the way you see your child, and you're doing this largely alone within your own house, it's one of the loneliest places in the whole experience, and it doesn't get talked about enough. So I want to say this clearly. The gap between your perspective and the perspective of your partner or co-parent, it's not going to risk the child's outcome the way people say it will. It just makes you a human team. And the fact that you're still showing up, still trying to understand your child, still bringing everything you have, that's profound. You don't have to solve the partnership before you can help your child. You don't have to get to full agreement before you can move forward. You work with what you have, you model what you know, and you build a relationship in front of you. In this video, I gave you a new way at looking at or thinking about the gap between you and your partner or co-parent. A way of looking at it that I hope made the gap feel less like a crisis. I hope you'll consider subscribing, giving this video a like, and I'll see you in the next one.